Well, ladies and gentlemen, the war in Ukraine has officially escalated. This had to have been expected by NATO, considering they authorized the use of their own missiles by Ukraine into Russian territory. And now we've got Russia. Yesterday, this all came out. It was originally reported it was ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that were launched. The first time we've ever seen these used at war. These were the type of missiles that were originally developed under the Nazis with the V-2 rocket. This is the variation of them, the newer thing. But apparently it's actually not the ICBM. It's Russia's own version of it. And these are like hypersonic missiles. This is like a Mach 10 speed, they were saying. I mean, this is crazy. You can take a look at this. These missiles hitting in this, it looks like security footage here. I mean, it's insane how fast these missiles are coming down into Ukraine territory. These are the first type of missiles ever, I would imagine, at this scale that were fired in any wartime scenario, or any scenario that's not testing. But it is pretty crazy there. We've got that. We've also got Putin saying we will warn any civilians in Ukraine and civilians of other friendly states to leave potential attack zones in advance. Russia is preparing to launch a major missile attack in Ukraine. Putin saying America is pushing the world into global conflict. And so this is all posturing. We understand this. There's many different ways to look at it. From what I've seen, the main liberal argument is they're saying there's absolutely no way, even though there is escalation and liberals wanted escalation, there's no way that Putin is going to launch nukes, because it is, I mean, he's going to destroy his country if he does that, because you're going to get all of NATO coming back. And then you're talking about nukes going each way. What is China going to do? It's just a total mess. But the thought here is this is a risk assessment against Russia. That's why NATO authorized the missiles from Ukraine to be used. And then people say, well, Russia was already using those type of missiles. Why can't Ukraine? Well, because the issue is it's not their missiles. These are not Ukrainian missiles. These are missiles that Ukraine is basically borrowing from NATO countries, which in essence is bringing more countries into the war. It makes the war a more global conflict. And of course, Putin says this. They've already gotten soldiers from North Korea that they've accepted and that are fighting for them. I mean, this is a total joke, right? He's saying it's a global conflict. What about the North Korean soldiers that you've already brought on? But listen, when it comes to this, I think it's a risk assessment by NATO, and they're saying that Putin wouldn't dare escalate to nuclear war because it would destroy his entire country. And so this is just, I mean, me personally, I think it's at this point, enough is enough. We do need to get some peace deal. I really don't care about giving up 2 regions in eastern Ukraine. I know there's the fear mongering, and you know what? You're seeing this more and more now with the escalation. They were saying this back in 2022, but then it was kind of on hold because the war wasn't going anywhere. But they were like, this is appeasement, just like with Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler, and it's just nowhere close to the same. I used to study World War II. You want to talk about appeasement? The Soviet Union and Nazi Germany both invaded. It was really just the Nazis from the West, but they invaded Poland and they split Poland in half. Stalin was shocked at the amount of progress that the Nazis were able to make. That's why he invaded, and that's neither here nor there. But they made an agreement and they both invaded Poland. I mean, that's real appeasement. The idea that appeasement, and this is comparable to, Nazi Germany being allowed to take over half of Europe, it's totally ridiculous. These are 2 territories in eastern Ukraine, and Russia has already lost many soldiers, many more than they thought they originally would, fighting for this land all the way in eastern Ukraine. So the idea that this would be appeasement on the scale of Nazi Germany is just completely ignorant. They just don't have the army to do anything. Also, you look at their location; they're not even in Europe. Germany is like in the center of Europe. It's a lot easier to take over the smaller countries and invade them. And some of those smaller countries, Germany was able to annex because they wanted to join the Nazis. And so it's just not even close to comparable. And also nowadays, you also have to deal with nuclear bombs. That's the whole problem with this. That's why Republicans don't want this escalated any further, because the idea that it is going to develop in a nuclear war over two territories, two eastern regions in Ukraine is simply ridiculous. And they're like, well, Putin stole that land. Well, this land gets stolen all over the place. Land has gotten stolen since the beginning of time. That's just the reality. And they're like, oh, do you want to give Putin the stolen land? Well, I mean, technically their military has invaded it. It is, they can annex that area. That's just, they have a stronger military. Now, listen, if you want to blow up the entire world over Ukraine, over two territories in eastern Ukraine, that's your decision, I guess. I think it's dumb. And most people do think it's dumb, and Trump thinks it's dumb, and that's why he's going to come in. But just this idea that, oh my God, this is going to set such a bad precedent. This is Nazi Germany all over again. You're comparing apples to oranges. You're either historically ignorant on Nazi Germany and how powerful they got in the way they were able to grow. They invaded Poland with the help of the Soviet Union. So where is the equivalent of this? Who's helping Russia invade Ukraine here? From the West? Nobody. This is ridiculous. They've gotten two regions in eastern Ukraine, and it's taken them 2 years to even hold that. So, and again, my original speculation on this was NATO, and this is all European NATO countries. This is why NATO is such a very, you want to help these European countries, don't get me wrong. You want to have them as allies, but it's so tough because you're in this quagmire where you're contributing more to the war effort in a war that's not happening even on your continent, that's separated by an entire ocean, and you've got Putin coming out and blaming you. And you can say, well, Putin's just saying that he's being unreasonable. He's got he's got North Korean soldiers helping him, and I understand, I get it, but still, he's the figurehead of this entire thing. He launched the invasion, and he's blaming the United States. So it's very annoying to be in this scenario when you're talking about many people in the United States saying that it's a regional conflict, it's Ukraine and Russia and the European countries. Why doesn't the EU just get back together with the UK and leave the United States alone? Maybe leave the United States as like the overseer in case things get really bad. We're just not in the same geographical position as these other European countries. So why do we have to be influenced by them so much to contribute and say, oh, this is the worst thing ever? It might be the worst thing ever for Germany or for France, but for the United States, it's like, and also like there's no reason this should be escalated any further. And I'll reiterate my point that I made. I think the European NATO countries understand, and Ukraine understands, that Trump's coming in and there's going to be some type of peace deal, and maybe they want to give Ukraine more negotiating power when it comes to peace, because this is a risk assessment. And Russia, for as much as they want to play around, and if you're talking about a war, Russia versus Ukraine, Russia would win 100 times out of 100. But if all of NATO and their might gets behind Ukraine and says, no, you're not taking Ukraine, Russia's not going to get Ukraine, or it's going to be a total mess if that happens, because then you get the nuclear conflict. But this is all risk assessments by Russia, by NATO saying there's no way Putin would escalate it to nuclear war because it would be death to his own country. Russia saying that they think that they have all the leverage because Ukraine isn't as powerful as Russia, and they don't think NATO is going to get too involved. See, that's the other thing. With NATO allowing this, we knew it was going to escalate. We knew Russia was going to launch missiles, more high-grade missiles. But does this help Ukraine in a peace negotiation? Because now Ukraine can say, I've got NATO behind me. They've already authorized missiles that the United States made, that the UK made, and I can launch them into your country. So listen, when you talk about peace, if you're Ukraine, you don't want to be in the situation, and really they have no choice other than what NATO wants to do. But you don't want to be in the situation to where you're like, all right, we have to accept some type of peace deal. Otherwise, Russia's just going to run us over because we have no support from NATO, because then you're getting a terrible peace deal. If you're Ukraine, you want to be like, yes, NATO is standing behind us. They're in this fight with us. They think what you did was terrible. And listen, if we don't get a fair peace deal, we're not going to accept anything. And we're just going to continue to bomb your country with NATO missiles, which obviously I don't want to have happen, because then you're talking about more and more escalation. But I'm just saying, in the context of a peace negotiation, if you're Ukraine, you want NATO to be behind you 100%. I think the entire thing needs to end absolutely. And, this whole thing, like, how is Russia going to be driven off of that Ukrainian land? What type of, unless you straight up threaten if NATO threatens Russia and says, listen, we're going to send our troops in there and it's going to get really ugly for you, that's really the only way it would happen. But then you risk nuclear war with Russia nuking the NATO European countries. So that's all a real mess, but you can see, I mean, Putin's going to come out and say, oh, it's the United States and stuff. And I mean, obviously it's total crap. I mean, this is all a reaction by the United States and by NATO in general. And the funny thing is, it really is those European NATO countries that have massive influence over the United States right now because of the Democrat regime that's in for the U.S. and it's Biden, and it's funny, people say, well, Biden's doing X, Y, and Z. It's all European NATO countries. They're the ones that are saying this is a terrible crisis, and it's a lot worse for them than it is us based on our geographical location. But that's the influence that's really at play when it comes to this. Anyone who's ever had a Ukraine flag in their bio should be sent to the front line first. Britain is now directly involved in Ukraine war after its Storm Shadow missiles were used. Yeah, so that's the other thing. Britain's missiles are now used, not just the United States. So that's another escalation. But there's not going to listen. Nobody's going to, no United States citizen is going to be fighting for Ukraine here. Those two regions in Ukraine, that's ridiculous. And then the idea that we would act like this is Nazi Germany 2.0, with the situation that happened in the late 1930s, it's not even close to the same. Two regions in eastern Ukraine and struggling to even get those is the same as taking over the Rhineland, Czechoslovakia, Poland. It's just Austria, annexing Austria, Hitler's homeland. It's just not even close to the same. But I mean, that's what they're going to say because they're going to fearmonger, and it's like, oh, it's appeasement. Well, I mean, this is land that they previously had. We've also got this, is Biden going to set the world on fire in the last moment. Several officers even suggested that Mr. Biden could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine that were taken from it after the fall of the USSR. That would be an instant and enormous deterrent, but such a step would be complicated and have serious implications. Yeah, everything's going to, anytime you escalate, it's going to have crazy implications because it's just going to be a greater, it's just going to give Russia more justification in their eyes to escalate with even bigger missiles. If you do something like that, I mean, that's got to be off the table. Dude, that would be, I mean, you want to talk about having a death wish, returning nuclear, when we're all talking about nuclear bombs and trying to stay away from this, you're going to return. I think that's just, I mean, that is the New York Times, but you can tell that's even just a suggestion. I don't know, there's no way, man. I mean, the only thing that you would really have to know deep down that Putin wasn't going to use nukes if you did that, because you would give Ukraine a lot more leverage and negotiating power because they would have nukes. But again, we're talking about de-escalating. You're giving a country that's at war nukes against another country that supposedly has the most nukes in the world. Yeah. Boy, you must have some really good intel there. But even if you have good intel, what's to say Putin doesn't change his mind? So, I mean, it's just like, I mean, it's a terrible situation. This is war in the 21st century. It's a game of chicken on who's going to nuke who first. And we all knew it was going to turn into this. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.